You probably didn't hear this yet, but Honda just froze sales on thousands of Gold Wings. Dealers were told to stay quiet, riders told to park their bikes, and one single bolt is grounding the biggest touring legend in America. This isn't a rumor, it's happening right now. If you own a wing, you need to know why parts disappeared, why dealers can't talk, and how fast this could hit resale. Because once this story hits the mainstream, it won't just be riders asking questions. It'll be everyone wondering if Honda just cracked its own crown. The stop sale nobody saw coming. You buy a Honda Gold Wing because it is supposed to be the one motorcycle you never worry about. The big 6-cylinder machine that just keeps going mile after mile, from Ohio to the Oregon coast and back again. For decades, riders like you swore by that dependability. But this year, the letters started showing up. Dealers quietly telling owners of certain GL 1800 models built between 2018 and 2021 to stop riding until further notice. The reason was a single bolt in the primary drive gear that could back out and stall the engine mid-ride. To anyone outside the garage, a loose bolt sounds minor. To riders, it means everything. That bolt connects motion to trust. Lose it at highway speed, and the bike can suddenly go silent under you. No power, no drive, no shoulder wide enough to stop safely. It is not a cosmetic problem. It is the kind of defect that turns comfort touring into a guessing game about whether the next mile will be your last smooth one. Honda's statement called it a precautionary stop sale to ensure customer safety. That corporate tone did not match the fear showing up on forums. Owners waiting for spring trips had deposits on cabins, maps spread out, and now they were grounded without parts or timelines. For a company that built its empire on bulletproof engineering, the silence felt worse than the bolt itself. Every rider knows parts wear out, but parts that fail from design or assembly flaws, that hits pride. And it begged one question. If the Gold Wing, Honda's crown jewel of reliability, can stumble here, where else is that armor cracked? But was this the first time the wing's armor cracked, or just the first time we all notice? If you've ever owned a Gold Wing or trusted Honda's bulletproof reputation, drop your year and mileage in the comments. I'm tracking how many riders actually got recall letters versus finding out online. Real stories beat press releases every time. The forgotten brake recall. Long before this latest stop sale, Honda faced another ghost that refused to die quietly. Between 2001 and 2010, the GL 1800 Gold Wing suffered an issue in its combined braking system. A hydraulic quirk that could cause the rear brake to drag even after the pedal was released. It started as a trickle of complaints, then turned into an investigation that dragged for years. Honda was slow to admit the scope. Riders reported brake heat, pad wear, and that cooked fluid smell after long descents. The recall called it a potential condition, forcing repeat inspections before fixes. The real failure was hesitation, treating field reports as noise, not warnings. That delay trained loyal owners to question the factory. Mike Dawson and others remember defending Honda back then, believing perfection wasn't required, but honesty was. That trust wouldn't break overnight, but cracks had formed. So when the new stop sale echoed those old tactics, limited language, minimal detail, it hit the same nerve. The recall may have ended, but the doubt never really left. The difference now is that the stakes have grown. Modern bikes carry more electronics, more interlocks, and more to lose when communication fails. Because when fuel joins the failure list, the pattern stops looking like chance. If you're still riding through all this, ride smart. My go-to gear and accessories are linked below. Trusted, tested, and built for real roads. The fuel pump gamble. In 2018, the Gold Wing went through its boldest redesign in decades. Smaller, lighter, sharper. Riders wanted to believe the new age wing still had old-school Honda reliability baked into every bolt. Then came the fuel pump recall. At first, it sounded isolated. A handful of owners reporting sudden engine stalls or difficulty starting. But once the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration database started filling with identical stories, Honda traced the problem to the fuel pump impeller. A supplier used a resin that could absorb moisture, swell, and cause the pump to seize. 2018 and 2019 models were called back for replacements. What should have been a quick swap turned into a waiting game. Dealers reported shortages, shipping delays, and multiple part numbers that added confusion. Riders who lived in warm, humid states noticed symptoms first. Hard starts, sputtering under load, Bikes dying at idle. The fix worked, but the process left bruises. Every month of downtime was a lost season for riders who only get a few good weather windows a year. This was not the first time a supplier shortcut rolled downhill onto owners, but it was the most public for Honda's touring flagship. It showed that even a company known for over-engineering could get trapped by its own supply web. The Goldwing's reputation rested on absolute reliability. Now that image was dented by something as basic as a fuel pump. Honda handled the paperwork cleanly. But the deeper issue was cultural. Outsourcing critical components without redundant testing might save pennies. It costs trust. Writers do not forget that kind of lesson. And even when the hardware is replaced, software can still pick a fight with your inputs. The digital drift. If the mechanical problem shook confidence, the software ones tested patience. The newest Goldwing generation introduced a dual-clutch transmission that shifted faster than any human hand could, paired with ride-by-wire throttle and drive modes, straight out of sport bike playbooks. On paper, it was progress. On the road, it was a new kind of uncertainty. Owners began describing hesitation when rolling on the throttle from a stop, or delayed downshifts that caught the mid-corner. Some reported rough transitions between gears, like the computer could not decide what the rider wanted. Honda pushed firmware updates through dealers, often bundled into routine services, and rarely explained what changed. The result was a quiet software arms race between frustration and fine-tuning. For veterans who had spent decades relying on mechanical feel, this new layer of electronic mediation felt foreign. A clutch cable could stretch, you could adjust it. But when a computer made the mistake, you had to trust the update. Riders joked about patch notes for motorcycles, but the humor carried anxiety. They were no longer just riders, they were beta testers in helmets. The DCT technology itself was brilliant when it worked, smooth, precise, uncanny. Yet the combination of recalls, supplier defects, and firmware quirks started to erode the aura of invincibility that surrounded the Goldwing for 40 years. It was not that the bike had suddenly become unreliable, it was that riders had to start reading bulletins before planning rides, and that changed the relationship forever. That was when riders realized a one-year mess had become a multi-year blueprint. The Grom connection. The story of the Goldwing's mechanical headaches doesn't begin with the big tour. It actually started years earlier, on a motorcycle that couldn't be more different. In 2014, Honda's little Grom, 125 cubic centimeters of urban fun, was recalled for a fuel system defect. A tiny impeller inside its pump could deform, cutting off flow and leaving riders stranded. It was the same failure category that would later haunt the 2018 Goldwing. Only on a bike 1/4 the size and 1/10 the price. The Grom recall barely made headlines, but it exposed a deeper flaw. The same supplier built pumps for larger touring model, yet no redesign or extra inspection followed before the defect resurfaced in a flagship bike. That's not coincidence. It's a governance gap. Honda once cross-checked every lesson across models, but cost pressure and complacency loosened that loop, turning a small bike warning into a big bike failure. The Grom incident should have been a flare in the night sky. Instead, it became a footnote, until the Goldwing made it impossible to ignore. If the smallest and the biggest share the same weak link, who is guarding the line? The paper wall. To understand why riders lose faith faster than machines lose parts, you have to follow the paperwork. Every recall begins the same way. An internal bulletin goes from corporate to dealerships. It lists affected VIN ranges, part numbers, and procedures, but it often carries the warning, not for customer distribution until public release. Dealers get the information first, yet they can't speak until Honda clears the press statement. That waiting period can stretch from days into weeks. Owners are left guessing while forums fill with leaks from frustrated advisors. Riders like Mike Dawson don't want rumors, they want clarity. "We're investigating" sounds like denial, and trust drains faster than oil. Honda's lawyers call delays risk management, but to veterans and retirees who log every mile, it's avoidance. They can forgive defects, but not being the last to know about dangers that could leave them stranded. That paper lag doesn't just hurt feelings, it freezes business. A dealer who can't explain what's happening can't sell, can't service confidently, and can't keep his regulars calm. The paperwork designed to manage liability ends up costing loyalty. When papers move slow, money stops fast. That is where riders feel it next. The waiting game. Once a recall becomes real, another clock starts ticking. The downtime. Parts orders flood in, service bays fill up, and the riding season ticks away. Riders with cross-country plans suddenly face an open-ended wait. Some roll the dice and keep riding, hoping the issue won't hit them. Others park the bike, staring at it in the garage, polishing a machine they can't trust to cross a county line. In 2019, an Arizona rider's new Goldwing sat 75 days awaiting a fuel pump, ruining his Colorado trip. Multiply that by hundreds nationwide and you see it, an entire riding season stolen. This wasn't impatience. Riders like Mike plan every mile and weather window. When vague timelines replace clear answers, the loss isn't just time or travel. It's the memories that should have filled those roads. Dealers try to help. Some offer storage, some push updates weekly, but they're stuck waiting too. Parts distribution hubs operate on global logistics now, not regional warehouses. A single missing box in Japan can ground a fleet in Texas. Riders might not follow those details, but they feel every delay as a kind of disrespect. In the world of touring bikes, time is currency, and once it's spent, you can't earn it back. Lost time is the first loss. The next one shows up on the price sheet, the root cause chain. To understand how this keeps happening, you have to trace the engineering chain from concept to customer. In the early 2000s, Honda's internal testing culture was famous for its paranoia. Design reviews, supplier audits, and destructive testing that bordered on obsessive. By the mid-2000s, global production demands forced a shift. Suppliers handled more design validation themselves, and oversight turned into sampling rather than full verification. It saved money and sped up launches, but it also meant that one bad batch could travel farther before anyone caught it. This isn't just Honda's problem. It's the industry's. Chasing quarterly gains over long-term reliability, manufacturers replaced human oversight with automation. The engineer who once checked torque by hand now codes tests. The inspector who felt flaws is gone. On paper, it's efficiency. On the road, it's failure. Shared parts mean one supplier's mistake spreads across continents. The same pump, the same bolt, the same costly oversight. Honda's culture still holds fragments of its old rigor, but it's stretched thin. The Goldwing recalls, the Grom overlap, and the slow communication form one story, a system too optimized for its own good. Machines aren't getting worse. The margins for error are just vanishing. And once those truths hit the open market, numbers did what numbers do. The resale collapse. The first sign that trust was turning into loss showed up on classified listings. Goldwings from 2018 through 2021, the same years wrapped in recall language, started dropping in value overnight. Dealers who once bragged about used wings holding steady at $20,000 were now hesitant to make offers. Private listings sat unsold for months. Buyers scrolling through online marketplaces noticed the pattern. Identical models, identical mileage, wildly different prices depending on whether the recall had been closed out. For riders, proving a Goldwing was fixed became as vital as maintaining it. Appraisers checked VINs before trade-ins, lenders froze loans, and buyers feared breakdowns or months-long part waits. Owners who'd cared for their bikes watched thousands vanish in value. Depreciation wasn't for mileage, it was perception. Even with repairs done, the stigma stuck, because in the used market, reputation fades slower than chrome. For a brand once synonymous with bulletproof resale, that was a brutal shift. The Goldwing, once an heirloom, was now treated like a liability. So while the value drops, what are owners supposed to do as the weeks drag on? The parts freeze. Those weeks turned into months, and frustration turned into fatigue. Dealers across the country began juggling repair tickets like hot potatoes. Honda's distribution centers rationed out components to prevent hoarding. A single primary drive bolt or fuel pump assembly became a golden ticket, and service departments had to decide which customers got fixed first. It wasn't malice, it was logistics. Global supply routes still hadn't stabilized after years of disruption. Manufacturing plants overseas were catching up on multiple recall campaigns at once, and freight costs had tripled since the pandemic years. Yet to the average rider, those explanations sounded like excuses. A recall is supposed to mean immediate action, not indefinite waiting. Some dealers offered loaners, but inventory shortages made that rare. Others simply stored affected bikes for free, hoping to preserve goodwill. The visual became a quiet tragedy. Rows of gleaming gold wings lined up in back lots, unrideable, waiting for one part to arrive. One Arizona dealer described his service yard as a museum of patience. Owners called customer service lines, filed complaints, and joined online groups to share updates on part numbers and shipping schedules. Honda maintained that replacements were being prioritized, but field experience told a different story. Riders compared delivery estimates that stretched from weeks into quarters. The longer the bikes sat, the louder the frustration grew. Every day without movement chipped away at the image of a company that once prided itself on precision. Bikes went quiet, but something else got loud. Anger. If you believe riders deserve truth before marketing spin, subscribe now. We're exposing what manufacturers won't say, because your safety, your wallet, and your freedom on two wheels still matter. The loyalty rift. When you spend decades believing in a brand, betrayal doesn't arrive with fireworks. It seeps in slow. For riders like Mike Dawson, the Goldwing wasn't just another motorcycle. It was the machine that carried their stories. Cross-country rides, iron butt runs, anniversaries, and friendships forged at gas stations, they all revolved around that badge. So when the recall silence dragged on, it hit deeper than inconvenience. It felt personal. Many longtime owners had defended Honda through past decades. They pointed to the smoothness of the flat-six engine, the perfect weight balance, the unmatched touring comfort. The wing never quits, they used to say. But when it did quit, both mechanically and communicatively, the Brotherhood cracked. The company that once built trust mile by mile had gone corporate, and the community felt abandoned. Forums that once traded travel tips turned into digital town halls for frustration. As anyone heard from corporate became the new rallying cry. Riders started organizing their own tracking lists, documenting VINs, failure types, and dealer responses. The spirit of Honda's legendary reliability now lived only among the riders themselves, not in the offices that had promised it. The hardest truth was this: loyalty doesn't vanish overnight. It erodes in silence. The less Honda said, the louder riders spoke. For a generation that grew up believing a machine's integrity reflected the company behind it, the new reality was tough to swallow. Corporate mistook silence for loyalty. It turned out to be resistance. The corporate response. When the backlash finally reached headlines, Honda issued a carefully worded statement. It acknowledged isolated component concerns and reaffirmed a commitment to customer satisfaction. The tone was polished, corporate, and safe. It hit all the right notes: safety, transparency, apology, but none of the right chords. To riders who had waited months without answers, it sounded more like legal positioning than empathy. At dealerships, service advisors faced longtime customers, reading disbelief in every crossed arm. Riders didn't want statements. They wanted proof that parts existed and fixes worked. Meanwhile, corporate repeated phrases like reviewing procedures and enhancing quality, words that no longer carried weight. The real conversation had moved to garages and forums, where riders weren't demanding perfection anymore, just accountability from a company they once trusted without question. For many, the apology came too late to change the story. The trust deficit wasn't measured in money. It was measured in silence, in unanswered emails, and in the sound of engines that should have been running. Honda might recover its image eventually, but it won't be through PR. It'll be through parts arriving on time and bikes that stay running once they leave the shop. That statement did not end the crisis. It moved it upstairs. The dealer crossfire. Walk into any Honda dealership during the recall months, and you could feel the tension before you heard it. Phones rang nonstop. Service bays overflowed. Mechanics double-checked every torque spec while front desk staff repeated the same sentence 100 times a day. We're waiting on parts. Behind those counters were real people, riders themselves, caught between corporate memos and angry customers. Some dealers went beyond policy, offering free storage to save riders insurance, loaning out demo bikes, and staying late to give honest updates. Corporate wouldn't. One Missouri dealer put it best: "We're the face that gets punched for someone else's mistake." Every delay, vague bulletin, and missing part hit them first, turning a mechanical recall into a strain on decades of trust, loyalty, and shared miles. Dealers had pride too. Many had grown up selling gold wings to the same families year after year. Watching those customers walk away, not in anger but in disappointment, stung the most. Dealers asked for answers. Pretty soon the government did too. The regulator knocked. Eventually the silence broke, but not from Honda's side. It came from Washington. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began asking questions about the stop sale process and how owners were notified. To outsiders, it looked like accountability. To riders, it felt like déjà vu. Every investigation in this industry comes after the damage is done. NHTSA's job isn't to prevent problems, it's to confirm them. Once a defect hits a threshold of complaints, they open a file, request data, and push for a recall. It's a system built to react, not to predict. The agency can fine companies for delays or missed reporting deadlines, but it can't rebuild the bond between a manufacturer and the people who ride its machines. You can't legislate pride back into a product. In this case, regulators found no evidence of cover-up, just slow reporting and procedural caution. Still, the headlines were enough to rattle confidence again. Federal inquiry into Honda recall communications isn't a phrase anyone wants tied to a legacy model. And while lawyers parsed language, writers were still waiting on parts. For decades, Honda was the gold standard of self-policing, catching flaws before the government ever got involved. The fact that NHTSA had to intervene at all showed how far things had slipped. The oversight worked on paper, but trust doesn't rebuild through a PDF summary and a fine. It rebuilds through action, on the factory floor, one bolt at a time. Pride is not rebuilt by a PDF. That starts where the bolts meet the hands. The factory reckoning. Inside Honda's production plants, especially in Ohio and Japan, the backlash didn't just echo through boardrooms. It hit the workbenches. Engineers and line workers who had spent their careers chasing perfection began quietly pushing back against the culture of optimization that caused these failures. The word efficiency had ruled for years. Now they were fighting to bring back craft. One senior technician described it as a reset of rhythm. The old methods, manual inspections, longer endurance testing, second sign-offs, started returning. It wasn't nostalgia, it was necessity. Workers who once signed off on 1,000 units a week demanded time to tear down sample engines again, to measure wear the old-fashioned way. Supervisors who had been told to move faster began arguing for slower, better. And that corporate didn't call it rebellion, but that's what it was, a rebellion of integrity. The factory floor became the conscience of the company. Engineers wrote new testing standards that outpaced regulation. Small teams volunteered to audit supplier parts before shipment, refusing to trust certificates alone. It cost more money. It saved face. Some insiders said this was the first time in decades that engineers and mechanics felt aligned again. The machines they built weren't just units. They were statements. Every perfectly torqued bolt, every rechecked part was a way to reclaim the pride that had been diluted by spreadsheets. When the line stops blaming, riders can start believing again. The rider's rulebook. For riders like Mike Dawson, the factory reckoning was good news, but it came too late to erase the scars. The new generation of owners learned a hard truth. If you want to protect what you ride, you have to be as vigilant as the company that built it. That realization turned into an informal rule book, written in garages and shared across forums. First rule, check your VIN regularly. Don't wait for the letter in the mail. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration database updates before most dealerships do, and that's where the earliest warnings appear. Second, keep proof of every completed recall. Paperwork, invoices, part numbers. Buyers now ask for them the way they used to ask about mileage. Third, document everything. If a part fails, record the date, the condition, and the dealer's response. Those details turn frustration into evidence when it counts. Fourth, escalate calmly. Angry calls rarely move faster than polite persistence. Corporate systems respond to persistence, not volume. And finally, protect your resale value with transparency. A well-documented repair history isn't a scar, it's a shield. It shows the next owner that the bike was cared for by someone who refused to look away. For decades, riders believed the Goldwing was bulletproof. Now they know better. The real armor isn't in aluminum or firmware, it's in awareness. The same pride that built Honda's legend now lives outside its walls, in riders who demand better, because they've earned the right to. They called it bulletproof. Turns out the riders have to be. They called it the world's most reliable touring machine, unshakable, untouchable, flawless. But perfection was never the promise, honesty was. Riders like you built this legacy, mile by mile, truth by truth. Now it's our turn to protect it. Keep your eyes open, your record straight, and your engines honest, because when the corporations go quiet, riders carry the story forward. The Goldwing may survive this scandal, but only if the truth keeps running with it.